Now, I just want to bring David in now to share with us what his thoughts are on Brexit and how that's going to turn out and what the implications are likely to be for not just for the UK and for Europe, but even for the rest of the world. Welcome, David.
Marla, how are you? Lovely to hear you. Lovely to hear you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Not at all. My pleasure.
So tell us, what do you think is going to happen with Brexit?
Well, obviously the British have made a sort of a monumental mistake, which has displayed all sorts of flaws in our thinking about Britain that we never really thought about before. One, that the country couldn't govern itself. Two, that the economy was much more dependent on the rest of Europe than they let on. And three, that the actual gel that gels Britain together was considerably less adhesive than we thought. So next week is a big, big moment, Marla, in the whole Brexit calendar. If you're over here on this side of the world, it has become like a pantomime. You know, it's like theatre, and you've got the middle of the road Tories, and then you've got the extreme Tories, and then you've got the middle of the road Labour Party, and then you've got the extreme Labour Party. And what is basically happening is, up until this week, the extreme, what I would call the Brexit jihadis on the right wing, who want no deal and they want to crash out and they want this sort of neo-Elizabethan Britain to re-emerge as a trading nation. There's about 100 of these MPs, maybe less, maybe 75 odd, and they are running the show for the Conservative Party. Very extreme, tend to have a historical view of the United Kingdom based on the time when the United Kingdom ran places like Trinidad and Jamaica and Ireland and Barbados and all that sort of stuff. And then on the extreme left, and they're very anti-European, and on the extreme left, you have the sort of Marxist rump around Corbyn that were always very anti-European because they thought it was too right-wing. So what you have is, you have the right wing who think the EU is too left-wing, and you have the left wing who think the EU is too right-wing, and the big chunk in the middle, which is most parliamentarians in Britain, haven't had a say until the last couple of days. It now appears that Mrs. May, who keeps going back and forth to Brussels to get a deal, doesn't seem to realise the European Union don't need a deal as much as Britain needs a deal. She has got her deal, the May deal, on the table, I think next Tuesday or Wednesday. And the likelihood is the Parliament will vote against that. The House of Commons will vote against that. But if the vote is not a total catastrophic vote, May will be regarded as having been wounded but not totally wounded. And then she'll go back to the European Union and look for another concession. The likely concession they'll get is on what's called the backstop, which is the relationship between Europe and Britain via the border in my own country, Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, where I am in Dublin. And chances are we will probably give them something to be able to go back to their people and to suggest that they haven't been totally humiliated. In actual fact, it's a peace with honour. And my own sense, Marla, is that the hard Brexit is becoming less and less plausible and more remote. And what is more likely is a sort of a softer focused Brexit, whereby the European Union continues to be involved and Britain is in a customs union with the European Union. And ultimately that buys Britain a little bit more time in order to have a negotiation on what the final trading relationship is going to be. But the most interesting thing is that this has displayed neurosis in the extreme in the United Kingdom and a sort of an element of self-pity amongst the British negotiators, that people don't understand them, people don't realise how brilliant they are, and ultimately that to do a deal with Britain is an amazing thing for the European Union. Well, the European Union is saying, well, look, if we have a deal with you, you want a divorce. It's like any divorce, right? They've had a hissy fit. It's a bit like somebody said, you know, I want to divorce my wife, but I wouldn't mind sleeping with her again in the future at some stage, if she doesn't mind. And I wouldn't mind sleeping with her in her house rather than my house. So when I get sick of the new chick that I have on board, I'm going to go back to the old chick. And then you think, why is the old chick not really dealing with this? Why is she saying that doesn't suit me? So there is an element of a ridiculously, how would I describe it, over-optimistic divorce proceedings that the Brits are involved in. But the dust will settle, Marla. The dust will settle. And that's the most important thing. Now we're in the theatrical stage and it's histrionics and all that. It's good to look at, okay? But the dust will settle, and I don't believe there's a constituency, a centre ground constituency in the United Kingdom to crash out of the European Union. And I think that eventually they will vote on something a bit like the May deal. And the May deal kind of keeps them close to Europe, but not necessarily in Europe, which is broadly what most people in the UK who voted for Brexit want. And then you've got to think, okay, what is it going to do to the UK economy? Well,
right, that's what I was going to ask you about, because the thing is, the UK economy does have quite a bit of influence in terms of how some of the Caribbean economies perform. So that's what I was really going to ask you about next. So go right ahead.
So I think that with respect to the UK economy, obviously, if you decide that you don't want to trade with your main trading partner, which is the European Union, it sends a signal to investors, foreign investors in the United Kingdom. The UK is incredibly dependent on foreign investment for any sort of technologically or manufacturing savvy that they have. It's kind of sent a signal that this is not necessarily a very serious place. So I think it's going to take a little while for the UK to recover from that. And as a result of that, I think the UK economy is probably going to suffer not as much as the more pro-Brexit media suggest, but it will suffer. But what it's going to do is going to rebalance the economy away from its traded sector, ironically, towards its non-traded sector. And its non-traded sector is a very low productivity sector, so what you'll see is wage growth will be weak, even though employment will be high. They will run their current account deficit as they always do. Sterling will probably weaken a wee bit. And there'll be just a general cloud over the UK for a little while. House prices in London will fall quite dramatically, as they have been doing over the last while. And my sense is that the UK will be weakened. In terms of their relationship with former Commonwealth countries, as you said, in the Caribbean, this seems to be their shtick, that basically they will give the two fingers to Germany, France, Denmark, Netherlands, Ireland, all the countries they trade with, and they'll resurrect some relationship with smaller countries that they used to occupy, and that will ultimately be their salvation. I can't see that as a particularly interesting deal from the Commonwealth side, particularly as the biggest Commonwealth country. India has no interest in doing a bespoke deal with Britain.
Yes.
There's no interest.
And India and Canada will make all the difference in terms of a Commonwealth deal. But exactly. Us small countries, we're happy to have a deal,
Look, you're like us. You're like Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, Jamaica. You're like Ireland. We don't get to set the terms of the deal, unfortunately. We're deal takers. We're not deal makers. And that's life. That's what happens when you're a small player.
Indeed, except that I think, the fact that the UK is looking more towards the Commonwealth than it has in my memory, I think it's a good thing for the region, for the Caribbean, because it means we don't just have the EU to negotiate with, we have two separate entities. And if the Commonwealth is willing to negotiate with us and for us with the rest of the world, then we potentially have more bargaining power, potentially. And it looks as though from all the royal visits to the Caribbean and that kind of thing, it looks as though that's the way they're going, to try to reinvigorate the Commonwealth as an institution and also as a collective in terms of the other countries, and to try to form a much stronger trade alliance than it has been. And certainly in the Caribbean, we look forward to that.
No, I think that you're probably absolutely accurate, that they will now try and redouble their efforts in the Caribbean. They will try to redouble their efforts in parts of Africa, maybe with the Kiwis and the Aussies as well. The big players are India and Canada, but that doesn't mean just because they don't get a great trade deal with India, it doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be positives for the Caribbean. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that there's a much more proximate relationship between the Caribbean and England than there is between, for example, the Caribbean and Germany, that would have dominated the trade talks in the past.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. So, I mean, lots of excitement and lots to look forward to with respect to the backstop next week, and let's see what happens. But the Caribbean, of course, is watching closely because countries like Barbados and Antigua and others depend very heavily on the UK economy. And so when the Brexit referendum first happened, it was quite noticeable how far, and when the sterling collapsed, actually, that was when we saw tourism just collapse coming from the UK. And so a lot of countries are bracing for that in this region. So it'll be interesting.
It will be interesting. You know, my own sense is that you know, for the economy, the worst is probably over. They've had nearly 3 years of this Brexit stuff, and
right.
It's hard to see the currency getting much weaker from where it is. It get a wee bit weaker, but the big kick in the currency has come in the last 2 years. And
right.
The question then is, you know, are the English middle class who largely travel to the Caribbean on holidays, are they going to stop that? I'm not so sure. I think that what you have is a great theatrical media political event. I'm not 100% certain the economics will follow, but it's very clear the British economy will reorientate towards its non-traded sector. And that's what I think, because investment in the UK, inward investment, very much drives the UK's manufacturing base and the UK's, to the extent that it has a high-tech industry. It's high-tech industry. So, but again, it's lots of good theatre. Let's just see how it all pans out.
Indeed. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you joining us.
Not at all, Marla. It was a pleasure.